You've noticed if you've encountered anybody who's a liberal, whether it be on the radio or if it's somebody that you've met maybe at a school board meeting or you've gone to visit your child's school or campus, college campus, you've noticed this notion that they believe that liberalism is a self-evident truth and that they're smarter than everyone else. You see it. Sometimes I run into these guys around town, and usually they're associated with a college in some way, and they're still wearing the hippie beard. They haven't shaved since 1968, and they've got the little cap, the Siemens cap. What do you call it? Merchant marine cap that you used to see people like Pete Seeger wear around. And they talk in these strangely halting terms, but they're very arrogant and pompous, and you're just simply not. They If you would just listen to them and live your life the way they instructed you, the world would be a better place. The problem is the majority of people don't, so they look down their noses at all of you in those situations. And of course, you don't go to the opera. Yeah, that's exciting. I'd go to the opera. If they put on ice skates and threw a puck down and slammed a few people into the boards, then it might make opera a little bit more fun. But at the moment, it just doesn't work for me. 8 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Up to 55 today. And a couple of things I've got to share with you about the intelligentsia and how they're so much brighter than you are and what they're now recommending. National Review, Catherine Timp, the writer. In an interview with ABC Radio last week, philosopher and professor Adam Swift said that since, quote, bedtime stories activities do indeed foster and produce desired familial relationship goods, unquote. What did he just say? He said if you read to your kids, they'll be smarter and your family will be happier. He just didn't put it into terms that anyone could actually understand. He said he wouldn't want to ban these, but that parents who, quote, engage in bedtime stories activities, unquote, should definitely at least feel kind of bad about it. Why? Quote, I don't think parents reading their children bedtime stories should constantly have in their minds the way that they are unfairly disadvantaging other people's children, but I think that they should have that thought occasionally, unquote, he said. So in other words, if the dope dealer and welfare mom down the street doesn't read to her kids, and you read to yours, your kids are likely going to end up with advantages her kids never have, and that's bad because she doesn't read to them. You got it? It's your fault. It's your fault that you've been raising your children to have high IQs and high success rates and be super achievers, go out and get good jobs and keep this country afloat. It's your dang fault that you've been doing it. And this is one of your liberal college professors who's explaining this to make sure that we all get it. And that if we only would follow his instructions, we would raise a nation of dummies. Well, some people argue we already are, but we need more dummies according to this guy. Swift also added that some other things parents do to give their kids the best education possible, like sending them to, quote, an elite private school, unquote, cannot be justified. In other words, if you have the money or you have an opportunity, your kid's really bright because you've been reading to them, and maybe your kid can go without having to pay a fortune because they just want that kid who's got really big brains or using their brains in that school, you shouldn't do it because it would be unfair to those kids who can't go to private school. There's a movie that I saw a few years ago called Idiocracy. It's about a guy who wakes up in the future, a few hundred years in the future, and the president is the champion of the World Wrestling Federation. The White House is crumbling and falling down because nobody's got the brains to fix it. And this guy was of average intelligence when he went into stasis or was frozen or whatever happened before he woke up in the future. But when he wakes up in the future, he's the smartest guy in the country because everyone else is such a dingling because we've been following these paths. Back when I was a young man, there used to be a sports bar in my neighborhood. We used to go there to watch ball games, groups of us from work and other guys around the neighborhood. And it was the social area for the neighborhood. It was called Curly's. Pretty cool place. Back in the day before big screen TVs, just a lot of TVs around. So you could catch up with all sorts of ball games and the like. And they used to have one of those giant satellite dish antennas on the roof back in the day when those things were anywhere from 6 to 12 feet. So they could bring in all of the sports to keep you coming in so you'd eat the chicken wings and the pizza and all of that. And there was a guy named Joe Barry. Joe Barry would hang out with us at our table. Joe was a really nice guy. He didn't eat many of the chicken wings because he was usually out running 10 or 12 miles a day and, making sure that he didn't have an ounce of fat on his body. And Joe was a libertarian. We also had a guy named Kevin Delaney who would sit at our table too as well. And Kevin was the chairman of our state Republican Party. So the group of us would be watching a ball game, but we would be talking politics. And Kevin and Joe used to tell me, they used to say, you know what's going to happen? We're going to get to the point in this country because somebody's going to feel that they're disadvantaged and that they'd point up at a guy on the television screen and say, look, take a look at Nolan Ryan up there and see how good he is with that blazing fastball. Well, let's say your kid is in high school and he's set to be the next Nolan Ryan. That's not fair to the kid who can't throw a baseball or can't throw it anywhere near as fast. So we're going to have to chop off Nolan Ryan's arm so that we can equalize him with other people. And I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, I said, oh, you're thinking we're talking a hypothetical. But they said, we're getting so absurd in our need to equalize everybody and bring everybody down to one level because some people can't get to the top level, that if you have an advantage, a talent, it's also straight out of Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged. If you've got a talent, you're being told, don't use your talent. How about the movie The Incredibles? The same thing, where the superheroes were told, don't go out and do this because it embarrasses other people who don't have the skills you have. So what you've got is you've got this college professor saying, don't read to your kids. That way they can grow up and be dummies, and that way the other dummies won't have their feelings hurt. Now, there will be nobody left to run the country, but at least everybody will feel better about being a dummy. 9:14, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. I read something the other day, and it was about an older coach that gave a speech at a alma mater, and it was about 17 inches. It was, they asked everybody, how big is a baseball plate? How big is it? Everybody said 17 inches. And that's what he referred it to as, well, do we need to make it bigger for people that don't have the same? So I wish I could remember it all, but if you Google it, 17 inches, man, what a piece. It tells you how we've catered and changed to make it equal and fair for everybody, and it can't be. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, thank you much for the call. And speaking of baseball, I was watching Steven Strasburg pitch the other day on TV, and early in his career, he had what is called Tommy John surgery after blowing out an arm. Well, those arm injuries are much more common among pitchers now in baseball than they were a couple of generations ago. Why? Because in the late 1960s, a guy named Bob Gibson was so incredibly talented at striking guys out, but the mound was higher. I mean, the pitcher, if you look at the old films from the late 1960s and you see Denny McLain and Bob Gibson and Sandy Koufax out there, they're pitching from what is literally a hill. And they were just dominating hitters. They had gotten that good at their craft, at their profession. Well, what happened was somebody said, well, we can't have this. We need to have more balls leaving the yard. So they lowered the pitcher's mound. Well, that has to change the dynamics of how you throw a baseball. So all of these young, talented guys are blowing out their arms, and they either need the surgery or they end up as a middle reliever, or they end up washing out of baseball like Rick Ankiel. And they're gone. And you've got nobody. Ankiel's problems were a little bit more mental, but you get the idea. They just simply said, well, all right, you guys were too good, so we have to bring it to an end. And it happens in sports. In the late 1970s, the Montreal Canadiens were the most dominant hockey team I'd ever seen in my life. And all of a sudden, strangely, they started trading away all of their best young players. And then a team in New York got really good because they needed the New York TV contract, but they couldn't stand the success that these other guys were having. So they broke up the franchise, and they broke up the business model that had created that success. And so it happens in sports all the time. Those are easy analogies, but it does happen in business as well. A government comes in and tries to change the playing field around. And so you may be the guy who's the next Edison, but it won't happen today because they're not going to allow it to happen. Because somebody else out there who doesn't have the great idea, well, it's too bad. You may be very bright and you may have the invention. You may be the guy curing cancer, but you're going to hurt the feelings of all of those other doctors out there who never got this idea in their heads or never figured it out. So we can't have that as well. 9:17. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. Now, this guy is teaching at a college, and he's saying he wants dumber students. That's what he's saying. He's saying, don't read to your kids when they're little. You got on one side, the college professors complain that they're doing 2 years of remedial work when the kids show up on campus. Now on the other side, this guy is saying, well, let's not make, we'll make it 4. Maybe that way they get more money and perpetuate the need for colleges sucking up more of your tax dollars because we'll have to have 8 years to have kids graduate instead of the usual 4. Uh, I'm telling you, when we're down to this stage of the game in any culture, your culture cannot last. It is headed for decay quickly, decline, and then collapse. This is from the Daily Caller today, speaking of culture. Washingtonian Magazine senior editor Bill O'Sullivan wants people to stop using the phrase, start a family, because it's offensive to both single people and couples without children. There's a photograph of him here on his Twitter feed. I don't think he's going to be having many children. He looks quite like he would repulse most women. O'Sullivan also points out that the phrase has heterosexist roots. He notes that LGBT people now use the phrase as well, implying it might not be heterosexist to say start a family, but he still hears it more often from straight people. Either way, he says, for the sake of all the ways to be in the world, it's time to put an end to start a family. Because you know what? Some homosexuals' feelings might be hurt, or some cross-dressers' feelings might be hurt, or somebody who doesn't know yet what they are, their feelings might be hurt. So don't say start a family. Also on Sullivan's list of words to stop saying, female. We were never allowed to say female in one of the newsrooms I worked in. They always just said, say women. He quotes a reader who told him that the word sounds like biology class. For this reason, O'Sullivan agrees the word should be avoided because, quote, it's dehumanizing, unquote. Look, I know the difference. Maybe he doesn't. But I used to be able to be riding my bicycle down the street even when I was still a teenager, a wee lad. And I remember I was driving down the street and pedaling along, and if I saw a pretty girl, I knew right away the difference between her and me. It grammatically may not be right, but I'm telling you, it was pretty clear. And to this day, even though you slow down a little bit in old age as you grow older, I can still tell the difference. And sometimes you see some real artwork out there too. And you know what? Maybe women who are good looking are going to have to start, being frumpy. So that way the ugly ones don't feel bad. And there are ugly ones out there. Ed Rendell, liberal former governor of Pennsylvania, says so. I know there are ugly men too, but we only need a big pile of money for you to like us. Yeah, all right, I know it's a double standard, and maybe we shouldn't have that either. Perhaps the liberals will outlaw making money. Oh, that's right, they already have. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A bit more on these cultural battles, and then I want to spend the final half hour of the program talking about Memorial Day and the meaning of it. And yes, it's becoming a forgotten holiday, but in some respects down the road, ultimately maybe it should be. In a perfect world, which we all know is not achievable. I just was listening to the commercial for McDonald's and recruitment as well. I'm looking forward to the new one when it opens, replacing the old one. And I hope to be the first guy either in line or in the drive-thru to try it out. You know who the most famous McDonald's customer is in the country? Donald Trump. He tweeted out a photo yesterday of him after his speech in Bismarck. He was on the plane eating McDonald's. And this is not a stunt of any kind. He has mentioned before his fondness for eating at McDonald's. And that makes 2 of us. I had a debate the other day with Penny Main about who had the best French fries in Twin Falls, and we still came back and settled on McDonald's. And I know there are a lot of good restaurants out there with good French fries, but that's the one thing that is, if you can find something that somebody has perfected in America, French fries at McDonald's. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I wanted to mention our friend Dr. Eric F. Jones. We may be seeing him a bit later again this summer. He was with us last Friday, just a week ago on the program, talking about his holistic approach to wellness. And he's been in practice now, almost 25 years. With master's and doctorate degrees in marriage and family therapy, he uses methods of alternative healing, naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual cognitive self-regulation, naphthy. All of these things help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. And you'll find if you take care of some of these areas, the other areas improve in your life. He's currently accepting new patients, and there are weekend appointments and nights available too. That would be Saturday. I should point out he does like to try and worship his God on Sunday, but you can contact him by calling 731-7178 and his Facebook page, Eric F. Jones. Now, this is Eric with a C, Eric F. Jones, PhD, mental health and wellness therapist. Just before we wrap up this segment of the program, a couple more notes on how culturally we are circling the toilet here in the United States of America. Battle over LGBT amendment threatens to stall entire appropriations process. They've been trying to pass some bills in Congress this week, and they've been having some difficulty in the sense that, well, what's been happening is the Democrats keep attaching a rider on these bills. That is, the main bill, they keep attaching a bill that would, they claim, codify how we would prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation. And yet some people on the Republican side are worried. Representative Jim Jordan, he is from Ohio. He's a Republican. He's also Will Labrador's best friend in Congress. He told the Daily Signal, which is publishing this story, he opposed the energy and water package bill for a couple of reasons. A bill that is supposed to, he wrote, fund infrastructure projects becomes a vehicle for attacking religious liberty, and the leaders elected to protect taxpayer dollars continue to bust budgets and increase spending like there's no tomorrow. I can't support it. That is from today's Daily Signal, talking about how we're normalizing so many things that were once thought perverse in our culture. Christian Post has this. There's a big picture here of Franklin Graham. I have to tell you, a baptized Roman Catholic like me, my religious hero is not necessarily Pope Francis, but it would be Franklin Graham. I really am so impressed by this man. Evangelical preacher, the Reverend Franklin Graham, has railed against a $60,000 award given to a fifth grade transgender teacher in Oregon who says she was harassed and misgendered by coworkers. It gets weirder. This is a quote from Reverend Graham. Doesn't a person's DNA or birth certificate count for anything? Should in fact override fantasy. God created people male and female. That was on his Facebook page yesterday. Breitbart News reported earlier this week that Leo Sowell, who works as a fifth grade teacher at Gresham Barlow School in Oregon. Aren't you glad you got a 10-year-old that this guy is the teacher who thinks he's a gal? Uh-huh. Mrs. Sowell? No, it's I'm not Mrs. I'm not married. Ms. Sowell? Ms. Sowell, why do you have so much razor stubble? He was given the money after submitting a complaint claiming that it says her coworkers continuously used the wrong gender pronouns when addressing her. So apparently, just out of habit, they kept saying, "Hey, Mr. Sowell, hey, good to see you." "I'm not Mr. any longer. Dang it. You call me Mr. again, I'll rip your eyebrows off and maybe some of your parts as well, and you can join me as a woman." We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Yeah, Bill, good morning. With the government, birth certificate means everything to them when they come to confiscate your children. When you register your children to the government through birth certificate, they have every right to take them, and they use it to a full extent when they want to.
Well, you got departments all over the country that will come in and manufacture crises in your home if you've got young children to try and remove them. Thank you for the call, especially if you're raising them in a traditional sense any longer. Look, Nancy Pelosi yesterday, there was a congressman from Georgia. He's a Republican and a Christian, and one of the reasons he was opposed to this bill that went down in flames with the LGBT provisions, he read scripture to some of his colleagues. Even some of the Republicans got up angry and left, and she called it bigotry. Well, she claims to be a devout Roman Catholic. Her Bible actually says the same things. So what does she believe? How about the Republicans who got up and stormed out of the room and said, "Oh, it's bigotry"? They go back to their districts on weekends and they go to church and they profess that they believe in the Bible. Why? Because it looks good on their resumes. In other words, don't go to church if you don't believe it, because if you do, then you're a hypocrite, and then you're going straight to hell. Well, again, most of you are members of Congress, or you're members of Congress. Most of you probably already are. But it just shows you how they're going through the motions. And it's so obvious they're going through the motions. 9:30. Some thoughts on Memorial Day on the way.